Have you ever heard about the so-called lost books of the Bible? These are ancient texts that some claim were once part of the Bible but were removed or left out for various reasons. But why were they excluded? Were they hidden to suppress certain truths, or is there more to the story? Today we'll uncover the mystery of the lost books of the Bible. Let's start with what these lost books actually are. They're not a single group of texts, but rather a collection of writings, often referred to as apocryphal or pseudepigraphal books. Some of the most well-known include the Gospel of Thomas, the Book of Enoch, and the Gospel of Mary. These writings often claim to tell stories about Jesus, the apostles, or other biblical figures, and they're thought to date back to the early centuries of Christianity. So why aren't these books in the Bible we know today? The short answer lies in how the Bible was formed. The Bible didn't come together all at once. For the Old Testament, Jewish scholars had already established a set of sacred texts. The New Testament, however, was compiled over several centuries. Early church leaders had to decide which books were truly inspired by God and should be included. This process was formalized in the 4th century at councils like the Council of Nicaea and the Synod of Hippo. But what were their criteria for including or excluding texts? 3 main factors guided their decisions. Apostolic origin. The text had to be linked to one of the apostles or someone directly connected to them. Orthodox teaching. The writings needed to align with the core teachings of Christianity. Widespread use. The text had to be commonly used in worship and teaching across many Christian communities. Many of the so-called lost books didn't meet these criteria. For instance, the Gospel of Thomas contains sayings of Jesus that differ greatly from what's found in the canonical Gospels. Some writings, like the Book of Enoch, were popular in certain communities but not universally accepted. Others, like the Gospel of Mary, reflect theological ideas that the early church deemed heretical, such as Gnostic beliefs. Now, this doesn't mean these books are worthless or evil. They provide fascinating insights into the beliefs and practices of early Christian groups. Some of them, like the Book of Enoch, were even quoted or referenced by biblical authors. In fact, Jude 1:14-15 directly quotes the Book of Enoch. But the early church ultimately decided that these writings weren't divinely inspired in the same way as the books we now have in the Bible. It's also worth noting that the idea of a lost book can be misleading. Many of these texts were never really lost, but were excluded intentionally because they didn't fit the criteria for inclusion. Others were discovered centuries later, often hidden in places like the Dead Sea Scrolls or the Nag Hammadi Library. So, what does this all mean for us today? Should we read these texts? Well, that depends on your perspective. They're certainly valuable for understanding the historical and cultural context of early Christianity. They're also intriguing for anyone curious about the diverse beliefs that existed in the ancient world. But as Christians, it's essential to approach these writings with discernment, understanding that they're not considered scripture by the vast majority of churches. The so-called lost books of the Bible weren't hidden away to suppress truth. Instead, they were excluded because they didn't meet the strict standards set by the early church. They remain an important part of history, but they don't carry the same authority as the Bible we know today. What are your thoughts on these texts? Have you read any of them? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into Christian history and faith.